also be recorded from now. So good morning and good afternoon to everyone. And thank you to be here today with us. This is the third conference based upon the response of civil society, towards the crisis caused by the pandemic around the world. The previous one was a follow-up with several speakers as well from around the world. The first conference was held in June with 10 speakers from 8 different nationalities, and it was extremely rich in the content and ideas. And today is very particular conference because we are going to hear the women perspective related to the situation of today, or our time. And the setting of the conference is like a roundtable setting. It's like a dialogue. It's not a conference with PowerPoint or written a document or statement, but it's more a dialogue. So after we close with a dialogue with our speakers, then we will open the floor for the participant to ask questions, not to make statements, but to elaborate more on the content that was presented during our dialogue. So today we have several speakers. We have, Stephanie Diaz from Brazil. She's a professor, university professor, and also very involved socially on social issues, particularly related to peace building. And then we have Talita Betts from the United States. She's an expert on entrepreneurship, particularly for small business. And she has a lot of expert in this field and areas in other sectors. Then we have Sujata Jaina. She's a nun from India, and she's working especially in concern to the most vulnerable groups, and she's also a lawyer. And then we have Vangiulio Gigonio, always with these names, difficult pronunciation, from Kenya. She's an expert on constitutional issues and good governance. And then we have Daniela Anacleto. She's a young professional in the international relation and diplomatic world. So I think that by now, we are in October 2020. The coronavirus impacted the world globally. So I believe that each one of us is already quite well informed about what this virus is all about and the consequences in our health that this virus can eventually cause if you get it, and the type of impact that we witness within our nations. In Brazil, we have now more than 5 million people infected. In India, I think the number must be enormous, and so in China, but we don't have really clear information about what's going on. And we have several people that passed away because of this disease. In other words, what is happening in our world today, and one point is very clear, is that our social status, our social contracts is not sustainable, is not working very effective to sustain people, to protect people, especially when they're vulnerable or in a situation of crisis. So government, they try to apply certain policy. There is a lot of political infight among political leaders that is almost, shocking to see, because instead of working together, they're fighting in trying to find, a solution, the best solution, for themselves. So we are looking to identify the best possible responses from leaders of civil society. how civil society is responding to this crisis. What are the best tools, the best role model, the best samples? What are the opportunities that even this crisis has created around the world in our life? And what of impact this crisis has made in our life, in our daily life? That's why the women perspective is extremely important. It's not addressed enough, but it's fundamentals. The women participations in all fields of and way of lives. But I think most importantly is today the role of women in order to face this crisis and the position of family and the extended family that is our society in order to face this crisis. So I would like to open the floor to our speaker and to see who will be the first one that would like to intervene and start to open our dialogue. Please go ahead. Who would like to open?
I can do it.
Okay, please go ahead.
So, hello everyone. Very glad to be here with you. I'd like to thank you, Massimo, for this. I would like also to thank you, Global Peace Foundation, which was instrumental for making this happen. I'd like to thank you, the speakers who are here, Wanjiro, Shajita, Talita, and Daniela. I'm really glad to share this moment with you. I'm really glad that Global Peace Foundation has this gender-centered agenda as well. So I think this is really important for us globally and locally. So regarding the main question to this debate, and from being someone from research and education, what I do, how can I put this, how can I operate in terms of COVID-19 and actions nowadays? So my strategy is something that I study in terms of social action. So I think that we have three main agents here. We operate as individuals, like each one of us were here. We operate as members of groups, such as Massimo is member of Global Peace Foundation, and I am a member of the Federal Institution of Science, Education, and Technology from Rio Grande do Sul. And we also operate as institutions. So we have universities, we have churches, we have foundations, we have countries. We have, for instance, Global Peace Foundation, which is an important agent. So I think that we should think openly and globally. So if you think globally, we are facing a very fragile moment. We have many millions of people dead because of COVID-19. In Brazil, we have more than 5 million cases in Brazil. And this is a very hard issue, and you must think as different agents. How can we face this? So in terms of the community level, which I think is the most important, that's not the unique one, it's not the only one, but I think that that's the most important one for us to make a difference. So locally, we can operate as individuals. So for instance, you can choose to use our masks, and that's a choice that we have as individuals. So that's a very important choice for us individually. At the community level as well, we can act as members of groups. So as a professor in this institution, I work with projects. So I work with my students in order to develop projects that can help our communities. So we have two main projects, I would say, or have two examples of projects. One project, it's called the Integrating Library. We are working with the local library in order to informatize, to make it digital, what is manual here. So we have many students, teenagers, young people involved, targeting this community goal. So we know that we're facing this very fragile moment all over the globe, but you can focus our mind into something that is good for people around us. And you can do that with some action, very simple actions. So that's how I'm operating, that's how I'm working here in this community. I'm living in a city. It's a small city, of course, compared to others. We have 130 inhabitants here, 130,000 inhabitants. And so it's a small city in Rio Grande do Sul. And you have this Federal Institute, which work with teenagers. And we are really focused on helping our community, especially regarding education, technology, and also to help the health system. So one of the professors here, he worked with other colleagues of mine, and they built with the students the face shields to help the hospital. So if you combine our strength and you can and you work together toward a goal, I think we can make a local difference, especially if you focus on education and on the youth. This is just an example, and of course, in terms of institutions, you should do a lot more. I think that all over the globe, the institutions should be focused on trying to raise inequality. I'm here in Brazil. We are one of the greatest economies in the world. We are the 8th economy in the world, but we are a really unequal country. So we need to face that as individuals, as members of different institutions, and as institutions. So that's how I approach what you're facing, this crisis, this sanitarian, humanitarian crisis. We are facing something that's new to all of us as individuals, and we can join and can combine forces in order to try to make this something, to make this a context to learn and to act together. Even as individuals, we have choices as different people, but the only way to face something as big, as severe as this humanitarian crisis, the COVID-19 crisis, is to join forces. I do not believe that we can work separately and make something really special, or to make something really important to our countries if we not work together. So I'm really glad, and I'm here with Kenya, with India, with the United States, and with someone from Brazil as well, because it's learning with each one of you, and it's joining forces with you that we can really learn and do something locally, but of course thinking as one world.
Thank you, Stephanie. There is someone who would like to intervene now, some of the speaker in this roundtable.
I can go next just because to follow up with a Brazilian colleague.
All right.
So my name is greetings for everyone from Brasilia. First, I'd like to echo everything that Stephanie said and thank Massimo for this invitation, the Global Peace Foundation. I'm really happy to be here with all the participants, the other participants, because I strongly myself support these open conversations and to have dialogues with diverse people about common issues. So I'm really glad that I can be here today and share a little bit more of my experience in some inputs, right, on the matter of the COVID-19. Well, I have work related to support women issues and also youth issues. So I think that today I would like to stress out some common problems that we're facing globally, but I think that each person, each individual has a different reality. So I like to speak on a local perspective from my side, which is due to this uncertainty moment that we're facing in Brazil, this ongoing health crisis that had created a chain of other crises, I believe. This is worldwide, but as I said, I think we experience the crisis in different levels. So we have mental issues going on, psychological issues going on, we have economic issues, job unemployment issues, we have technology issues, education problems, a lot of things, because we're going through this moment, through a turning point in history, that everything's changing. We have to quickly adapt to everything. So related to what I do for the work I'm related in the national field, I like to stress out the two concerns that have been brought to my mind that I'm working closely nowadays, which is violence against women and the challenges for youth in the education system. First, since March, when the isolation restrictions in quarantine was adopted in Brazil, many realities change, that for the women and that for children. First, talking about the point of the domestic violence, many reality for women and children changed in their household. So due to self-quarantine, due to self-isolation, some family realities became more endangered. And then it became more, how can I say, this family realities became more danger to violence, and they became more, they felt, people that suffered violence, victims of violence, they don't feel as comfortable as before, let's say, in that way, to report some type of violence they're going through in their home. So what I think that's something that us as society has been doing, and I think this is a good thing to look at and to develop and improve, which is the movements that's been going around in social medias and the media channels that have been encouraging people to look for alternative ways to report crimes, to report violence. And this is something that I can see, I see that it's increasing from my perspective, which is youth talking about issues, common issues on their social medias and sharing information, which I think is critical, because people are now taking advantage of technology and creating innovative and alternative ways to solve problems that usually before was more easy to deal with, and now it has become more difficult because of all this that I'm saying, the restrictions and the social distancing and the stay-at-home orders. So the United Nations Women, they call domestic violence a shadow pandemic. So it's something that's going in parallel with other issues, and sometimes in the shadows that people are not addressing as much. But as I said, I think the social media is making a great impact in that, and we need to take advantage of the technology tools. On the other topic about education, since March, and this is worldwide as well, schools closed and ineffective education became a challenge as well. In Brazil, around 48 million students had to stop to physically attend schools. And this is very difficult especially when we talk about youth and children, because it's completely different for us adults to enroll in an online learning system, an online learning program, and to compare that with children. Children and youth, teenagers, they have the need to socialize. They're in a phase of their lives that they They need to interact and to self-identify themselves and learn how to work in community. And this became a challenge for many of them because we see researchers here, not to mention to talk about, that's talking about increase in stress among children and teenagers, increase in anxiety, and all because of this new learning system that had to quickly adapt, schools had to quickly adapt to an online version. And not to mention also that even people about those schools that were able to adapt to an online system. In Brazil, we had schools that suspended classes until further notice because they were aware of the reality of this inequality, the income inequality in Brazil. And they were aware that many students they didn't have the means to have an electronic device at their homes or even the connectivity to internet. So we're gonna see the real results, and I think that an increase in inequality in the upcoming years, because now children and teenagers are really dealing with we're like making wider the inequalities of education for those people, and it's very clear that it's related to income means. So poor students are having more difficulties to have a good education from those that are in a private education and have the means and have a good house environment, family environment to support them. So I myself, we know that everyone had difficulties to adapt to this. I had to adapt all my work also to a remote environment. So I think that what is necessary for us is to, as civil society, take advantage of nonprofit organizations and non-state players as us individuals, is to fill in these gaps that the governments are not being able to fill in, and try to promote initiatives to mitigate the exclusion and the social injustice. Discussions like this that we're doing today, I think that they open space to encourage groups of individuals to come up with some plans and come up with social movements. In a way, we can have groups that can go into communities and talk about resilience during COVID-19, during the pandemic, teach women how to empower themselves economically, to try to help them to try to get out of a violent home, and for children to give another perspective of education. I think that that willingness to help is something free, and we can do that on a daily basis. It's just a matter of doing what we're doing here today, brainstorming about it, building up contacts, and going into the field to actually help. Take advantage of the technology that we have available today to go help people, then try to reach out, to make a good outreach to issues that you think that you can overcome through simple solutions sometimes. So simple solutions like, as I said, filling in the gaps, creating groups of conversation, creating groups of activities, helping those people out in a voluntarily way. So I think we are able to make this extra effort and to promote more solidarity in the world. That's what I wanted to discuss, and just to start here, with everyone.
Thank you, Daniela. You touch a lot of issues. It was very broad, and target also the important issues of a youth situation. On a recent survey done nationally by the Conjuve, that is a Federal Council for Youth Affairs, they came out about 40% of university students, because of the online challenge, they're not interested to go back to school. So if this will be spread, let's say, on all level of education, from the fundamentals, basis of education, elementary school until university, and you have about 40% of the student population that will not go back to school, this will create an incredible crisis socially. And the impact will determine the development of this country for years to come. So This is another element, like I was mentioning on the introduction, of how much this virus has a challenge our way of life, and not only, but also our social pact, our social system. So something to really think about it and find the alternatives, because opportunities are also there. You were also mentioning about the isolations and people staying home, but there is also an interesting element that worldwide, the number of miscarriage has decreased dramatically, because mothers, they stay home, they are not stressed out of jobs, and their, process of giving birth to a child is more peaceful. So crazy enough, but that has been one of positive outcome. So even in the most terrible circumstances, there are point of lights, a point that are creating opportunities that we need to identify and elaborate and expand. So thank you very much. Let's move forward. So who would like to go next?
I can go.
I was. Oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead. Who was it?
Hi, this is Talitha. I think it was Sujarta, but I can go after her. It just depends. However you like for us to proceed.
It's okay.
It's okay, Talitha. You can go ahead.
Okay. Well, good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you are. I'm in the United States. So my name is Talitha Bat, and as Massimo so graciously introduced me earlier, I am the founder of My EOD, My Education on Demand. Which is a learning management platform. So I thought that it would be most reasonable for me to follow Daniela. Daniela, thank you so much for that. As you spoke about the youth, and also Massimo, as the youth are transitioning over into possibly an online platform, a lot of our youth today are, like you said, no longer interested in going back to the traditional setting after being impacted so hard by COVID-19. And so there are social consequences that come along with your children not wanting to go to school. And as an instructor and professor at the North Carolina Central University, as well as a parent, I was deeply concerned about the repercussions of youth not being educated in the school system. And so My EOD, the platform, came out of my love for technology, as well as my love for education, and as a parent wanting to make sure that the education continued, even if the children were not in a traditional face-to-face school classroom. So the My EOD platform allows the learning to continue. And a lot of the teachers and instructors, professors, I feel like a way for them to continue to engage students, as well as to motivate their students and parents as well to help students to continue with their education, is to transition them to an online platform like My EOD. Up until now, I think kind of lucidly, a lot of instructors have been putting information on an online platform, but not necessarily making it mandatory for them to be educated and trained upon, as well as taking their students into a direction that was mandatory for them to get their information or to get the curriculum. And so now is the time, actually before was the time, but now is definitely a mandatory time for many of us to look at the online learning platforms and take them seriously in order to continue to get the education, the curriculum, the structure, the training necessary for our students and our instructors to continue with their continuing education. And so I think this would be a reasonable way for everyone to look into the future of what education will really look like. You know, what the training for our instructors will really look like in their continuing education structure. And so looking at there are many different learning platforms out there. I know many different schools are starting to look at them using different things, but we highly encourage that technology become a serious everyday part of training and curriculum so that students are more aware and are kept in the loop, and that we don't lose them in the interim of the impact of COVID-19. So another thing that I wanted to touch on also was entrepreneurship. As Massimo introduced me earlier, have been in small business my entire life and very much into it over the past 20, 25 years. And so I work with the Policy Center at the Minority Economic Development Center here in North Carolina in the States. And so entrepreneurship is really big. COVID-19 has impacted small business in a way of which I would have never imagined in my lifetime. And so minority businesses have been impacted, African American business specifically, in the United States. Over 41%, I think at this point, was published by the Washington Post, if I'm not mistaken. Over 41% have either been highly impacted to the point where they have reduced their hours or reduced the number of employees or shut down altogether. And so 41% of anything is a huge, huge percentage. And those were numbers that were dictated several months ago when COVID-19 started. And so now we're into about the 8th month of COVID. And so we're looking at things from a completely different perspective now than what we intended way back in March when this first started, right? So we're looking now at businesses that will never reopen again, that people that have permanently lost their jobs. We're looking at material and products that are not being distributed the way they were distributed before because those businesses no longer exist. And so we're looking now from a federal, from a state, and from a local perspective of how we can help these small businesses, because small businesses have been the backbone of our communities forever. And so small business is necessary in order for us to grow as a community, not only as individuals, but together as a community to bounce back from this global pandemic. And not just in the United States. The United States trades with a lot of different people. So we need as a global unit to build our small businesses and to help our local farmers and people of that nature, to build them back to a point where they are producing again, and so that they are building and pouring back into the community. So we launched a lot of campaigns, things like buy local, buy small, and to help small businesses get back on their feet. Here in the States, we've also have launched several different federal and state campaigns where we're pouring money back into small business to help motivate people to even maybe start new businesses. There have been some interesting consequences to COVID. A lot of them have been negative, but we have also seen some positive feedback from COVID, if you can imagine. There have been new businesses that have started as an impact from COVID. There have been new entrepreneurs that have never taken on those industries before in life that are now tapping into industries that they didn't have an opportunity to tap into before, that are now getting seed money from different organizations, whether profit, nonprofit, corporate, or federal or state, that are now being able to open those businesses and help fill that void that has been put there due to the impact of COVID. So from an entrepreneurial perspective, there are many opportunities, but we do have a lot of work to do. And it's not a lot of work as an individual, not a lot of work as a state, it's a lot of work as a global unit in order for us to get past this. So just wanted to say those things, and thank you, Massimo, for having me on today, as well as thank you to all of the speakers. And I look forward to continuing this dialogue.
Thank you very much. Very, very important. What you said about the small business. I was talking with my daughter last week. She lives in near Seattle. Because of my work, she traveled all over the world because we move in many locations, etc. And she was laughing in a way because she said, I see my American friends, they're really struggling now because they cannot get right away what they're asking for. They are used to get any product at any time, anywhere, and very fast. And she said, it's not the case anymore. Now a product will reach the location maybe after 2 weeks, after 1 month, or is not available, not on the internet or not in the shops. So this really has changed the relation even among people and how people are dealing with their daily life needs. So I think based upon also your comment, we are talking about the United States. That is the most powerful economical system in the world. Is the most dynamic, is the more free, is the fast growing, etc. Is able to bounce back always. But imagine the same situation in Africa or in Latin America or in Southeast Asia. So if you suffer in the United States, how much more is in this part of the world? And as well in Europe, you know, my family, I'm from Italy, my brothers are there, my family. It's unbelievable what is going on. There are hundreds of thousands of people, they are losing their jobs. And their small business in particular, are closing down. It's like, it's incredible. And this has created the kind of fear, you know, for the future. So I think among our discussion today for the time, will be also important to address emotionally how mothers are facing that situation, because this is a challenge, not on the present time and day or week or month, but also in relation to the futures. So all our parameters now are under incredible pressure. All references are under judgment and crisis. So what to do? So that is, I think, the real big, you know, question mark.
Absolutely.
So thank you for your contribution. And now let's hear from our sister, Sujana Jaina from India. Please go ahead. Hello? She's not there?
She's unmuted.
Am I audible now?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yes, yes,
Is it clear?
Yes.
yes.
It's fine. Who's talking?
Greetings to every one of you from India. Thank you, Massimo, for giving me an opportunity to represent the victims of India. I'm really glad. Am I audible?
Yes, very good.
Okay. Now, without taking much of your time, let me talk a burning issue in India today, which is very much connected to our topic. A 19-year-old Dalit woman, meaning from the lowest rank in India's caste-based hierarchy, was assaulted by 4 upper caste men at her village in the northern Indian state on September 14 and left with severe wounds, including fractures, a spinal injury that left her paralyzed and a gash in her tongue. She died on September 29 during treatment. At her place, the administration, which is ruled by upper caste politicians, belongs to the present ruling party, hurriedly cremated the victim in the middle of the night and obstructed the media and opposition politicians from visiting the victim's village and family, promoting suspicious of a cover-up. There have been countrywide and worldwide protests against the rape by civil society, rights activists, faith-based organizations. But there has been an embarrassing and deafening silence maintained by India's top women leaders and politicians. It's because the victim is a Dalit. Worse so, there is an official campaign now to say that she was not raped, that the frenzy surrounding her death was done by those opposed to the government. It shows the spotlight again, the rampant sexual violence faced by India's 80 million Dalit women. Dalit women, who comprise about 16% of India's female population, face a triple of gender bias, caste discrimination, economic deprivation. They belong to the most oppressed group in the world. One of the reasons why the Dalits, especially women, bear the brunt of violence is because they have begun to speak. The present government intend to change the constitution, then anyone can easily subjugate the Dalit population. This mindset of Indians on women in general, the disgracing and degrading of Dalit in particular, is deeply rooted in Indian society. Let me read out some celebrated derogatory comments about women in the Manusmriti, which the Hindus consider as the divine code of conduct, both for men and for women. Manusmriti, chapter 5, verses 157 says, men may be lacking virtue, be sexual perverts, immoral, and devoid of any good qualities, and yet women must certainly worship and serve their husband. I think it is about time the world community recognizes the cries of Dalits, tribals, minorities, migrants, women, children of our country. Somewhere they are one and the same. As recent as of a data of 2019 shows, 10 Dalit women are raped every day. Now, I just want you to digest that. It's not a country that is safe for any women, more so for Dalit women, because she lives in a condition that marginalizes her and disadvantages are at every level of her life. Even today, a 16-year-old pregnant Dalit girl was a victim of honor killing in the northern Indian state again. This has become normal to the majority in India. We are immune to these kind of atrocities, the real face of India. Coming back to the pandemic, India is second in number of COVID-19 and 6.8 million as of today. Along with this, I wish to say the poor migrants were the worst affected during pandemic, but the government turned completely a blind eye to the cause of the migrants. Ever since lockdown, it is the poor migrants laborers who face biggest hardships. They feared starvation more than the coronavirus itself. They are mostly Dalits, tribals, minorities, women, children, and the poor, one and the same. It was very evident during this lockdown. The church and the civil society came forward and did massive work of reaching out to the hungry, reaching out to the working migrants, reaching out to the homeless every way possible. There is a lot of good thing done in India, very especially by civil society and faith-based organizations. But the humanitarian crisis foreseen in the coming months and year in India is challenging. We have autocratic leaders just like Brazil, just like what is happening in India. Brazil as an entire country is sold out to private, corporate, and mafias. This is the context we are in. The ruling party, the BJP government, has increasingly cracked down on civil society, harassing and bringing politically motivated cases against human rights defenders, academics, students, activists, journalists, and other critical of government under sedition, terrorism, and other repressive laws. So the challenge seems more and more because we are working against a regime which is anti-people, anti-constitution, anti-poor, anti-democracy, which calls the civil society. So we need leadership of the people, in particularly women in a highly patriarchal society. We have those leadership. Right to Food Network of India is one of the biggest network in the world, led by women. They do wonderful work ensuring food to the poorest population and fighting to make its universalization in the country. And the role of the church along with the civil societies is pivotal in the development of the marginalized. Why? Because the church stands witness through its option for the poor. It has to speak for the poor. It has to stand with the poor. The church has the responsibility today to save the democracy. To save the democracy, church has to come together and align with others. The more the church itself going away from people, the more it is away from the teaching of Christ. This is a time to gel with everyone. Thank you.
Hello, thank you. Thank you for addressing the issues of the poor of poor, especially of the Dalit minority within India. That is a long problem, social problem, the caste system, etc. And as well, we know that poverty and the poor condition of living of people can be solved by creating opportunities for those people. So relief and charity is the first basic intervention, but the real opportunity for people to raise up from a distressed condition is their response. And that will happen only with a collective efforts. As Stephanie was mentioning at the beginning, we need collective effort in order to find solutions. Individual proposals, individual organizational proposals, individual ideological or religious proposals are not sufficient anymore, especially in a global society as we are living today in this type of global world. So we need a collective effort based upon common values, common goals, and common objectives. In other words, creating a new social contract, a new social condition. This is what the world needs. In order to establish something like that, we need leaders of courage, leaders with a vision for the future, not leaders that they live day by day for their political empowerment or political interest or economical return. And so in the business world is the same. So we need that kind of people. We need to identify this kind of powerful individuals that have this type of vision for the world. So thank you very much again. And now let's go to our last official speaker from Kenya. So please, go ahead.
Thank you, Massimo. Thank you, Massimo. I didn't realize I was the last. I was trying to put up my hand, but I had to remind myself I need to make a contribution. I was getting very carried away by the speakers before me. And so thank you very much for inviting me to this platform and this wonderful sharing. Before I make my intervention, I'd like to maybe contextualize what I will say with three ideas. First of all, part of what I'll speak to was addressed in the African Charter for Popular Participation in Development, which was signed by African leaders in 1990 in Tanzania. And this was after the effects of the structural adjustment programs ravaged the economies of African countries. So in the 80s, countries were borrowing and then did not repay these loans, and were then put onto austerity programs that completely undermined the ability of government to deliver basic services. And African leaders met under the banner of was it the OAU then, and asked themselves, how did we get here? And what they said is that they identified the over-centralization of power as a key impediment to the effective participation of people in social, political, and economic development. And the charter says the over-centralization power has severely constrained and curtailed the motivation of the African people to contribute their best to the development process. So in essence, the African leaders said that development is about people, and development and government policies should enable people to realize their best development. And this wasn't happening because power was overly centralized. And we see the effects of this, the alienation of people from their development, which results in then, very discordant behavior. High levels of corruption, in my mind, are part of that, this very negative social culture where people view public resources as belonging to government, not to them. People don't own their own development. People become very dependent on political leaders. So we've got this upside down culture in our governance. And as far back as 1990, African leaders were saying this has to change, but it didn't change. We have an excellent charter. It was followed up then by another charter in 2015, but still power remains very centralized. My second thought is that African intellectuals in April of this year, after the corona virus broke out, after the COVID virus broke out, released a statement. And the statement said many things, but the essence of it is that they urged the continent's leaders to use the coronavirus pandemic crisis as an opportunity to spur radical change. We urge African leaders to think of the current crisis as a symptom of the deep structural problems Africa has to confront if it is to become a sovereign actor that contributes to the new global order. So this was the plea of African intellectuals. And I would then link this to my third idea, which is, if you look at the countries, the response of countries to the coronavirus, it's interesting, but we have had very good response from women leaders. And this is anecdotal, but looking at countries like New Zealand, Taiwan, Finland, Norway, Germany, there was a sense that these countries really moved very quickly, took very concerted decisions and fared better. This may be anecdotal, but it brings, it points out some key qualities of good leadership that, that are embodied here. One is decisiveness. Two, these leaders, these women leaders, these countries are more democratic. They were very participatory in their decision-making, very clear, decisive, and truthful in their communication with their publics. And there were a number of articles that were done on this. There was one kind of small study that was done. They were more humane in their response, more empathetic in their response. These countries, and also the approach to the pandemic, used a community health system basis. So a very much bottom down, a very much system of empowering the community and using community processes. Use technology effectively. And so there are lessons for us to learn. And you see that the successful response to the pandemic as embodied in these countries is, you know, the exact opposite of the centralized authoritarian, you know, kind of strong arm response that we've seen in many of our countries. With that background, I'll then briefly talk about our experience in Kenya and as civil society institution working on governance, what we focused on, we and other civil society, because like we said here, we had to come together. The pandemic, you know, is a massive thing, and we felt we needed to join our voices. And Kenya is, like many African countries, we were fortunate not to get the worst of the health aspect of the pandemic. And you know, we have been fortunate in this regard because our health systems are extremely weak. Our community health system, public health systems are pretty weak, but we didn't get the worst of it. And so we've been spared in that regard, but not at livelihoods. And one of the immediate things we picked up was that, you know, 82% of our employment is in the informal sector. This has two dimensions to it. So on one hand, the informal sector is extremely resilient. They're used to making do. Actually, when we did our little survey, you know, about a month or two in, we spoke to informal traders and they were saying, you know, we don't want government, anything free from government. We would like them to give us a fund that will help us get back to our businesses because we are using our savings, but we're not asking for anything. Because the informal sector bears the worst brunt of government. They're very coercive laws, and they are forced to then depend on their own social systems for their survival. So on one hand, we have, you know, 82% of the employment, those employed, who are used to fending for themselves. And of course, there's different graduations in terms of the size of business and also the circumstance, but more or less very resilient. And in this regard, government then is can very easily ignore the pain that families and businesses are going through because of this resilience, because people are used to making do, because all they are asking is, don't evict us, don't crack down on us, allow us to do our business and, you know, we'll survive. So the other dimension to that, the resilience is of course that government did have some social support, some economic support. There's some social transfers that are done, but then a lot of informal businesses missed out on this because of this resilience and because they're afraid to speak out. They then kind of put their head down, and government has then not paid due attention. So we felt we needed to amplify this as governance institutions, and we did. We also work in concert with some business associations, small business associations, and you know, they also picked up the call that government has to do something, and a few steps were taken. We don't believe it's enough. So why was government not able to respond? And I'll come to my last point, to address the 80% of the employed who were very much affected because they live on daily earnings. Part of the reason is because, like many African countries, our country is in heavy debt. Over the past 5-7 years, the debt issue has emerged again because after the global financial crisis, there's been a lot of very cheap commercial debt that has been available to countries. And some countries have taken up these loans, and in some cases, even bypassing the financial management requirements. So, you know, really undermining the governance in terms of how they procure the debt. So you then find we have a country that's very indebted. And what happens when your country is in heavy commercial debt, where maybe up to half of the revenue collected has to go to debt repayments, and commercial debt interest rates are extremely high? Then what happens is government has been gradually increasing taxes, gradually undertaking what they call fiscal consolidation. But in reality, what they are doing is removing money from social services and putting money into debt repayment and increasing taxes, especially taxes on basic goods. And when you increase taxes on basic goods, you're then taxing the poorest at the time when they need that money the most. So this is the situation in which we find ourselves. And so we decided to take up the issue of debt. And we've been advocating around debt, you know, and part of our argument actually is that some of this debt was procured illegally in contravention of the public finance management laws. And its impact and brunt is being borne by those who are most in need at a time when the country is facing an economic, economic shutdown because of the COVID restrictions. I think the last point I'll say on that is the issue of human rights, where you have had, because of heavy indebtedness and because of the scope of the crisis, governments have had to borrow some more and borrow for COVID assistance. But because the system lacks the adequate transparency, we've then had cases of corruption. So you have money that is borrowed, you have donations that are made, and then you've seen corruption again. And when civil society have sought to protest against the corruption and the stealing of COVID-related funds, we've had a crackdown by government. So the issue that Sister Sujata mentioned of human rights is very central. The issue of democracy that Massimo, you mentioned, is very central. And I really echo the call of Sister Sujata that we need the church, business, we need everyone to come together and defend our democracy. We need to defend community-based investments. We need to challenge the paradigm of large infrastructure development that is being used to borrow very expensively for big projects that are very expensive to the country instead of looking for local solutions. So the philosophy to development really has to be looked at, and this can only start with this kind of conversation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your detailed contribution, and especially addressing the, the debt issue. This is a very old problem with Africa. You mentioned the Treaty of 1990. I remember that. It was also the time when there was a lot of fight, to cancel the debt for the African countries. But, there is a lot of misconception and misunderstanding about Africa. When you say Africa in Europe or in Latin America or even United States, they think it's just one thing. But Africa is huge. Is an incredible, big, large continent. And the Africans that live in Kenya, like in your country, are very different from the Africans that live in South Africa, or in Nigeria, or in Congo Belga, or in Congo Brazzaville, Kinshasa, or in the North Africa, that are mostly Arab people, and on and on. This part of Africa depend totally from the policy of France. And the former British colony, they are still very much dependent from any contract with the United Kingdom. And so it is extremely complex and complicated. But the truth of the matter is that today the continent of Africa is #1 for growth. The percentage of growth in Africa is incredible. And the energy of young people, you have, I think, 75% of your African population below 30 years of age as a continent. So there is an incredible energy. In other words, it's really a continent of incredible opportunities. But, as you mentioned, is a problem of leadership. a centralized power. And within the COVID crisis, also what came out very clear in Europe is centralized management of crisis by government is not working, is not effective. All government worldwide, they are not able or capable to address all the needed issues within society. They don't. Or they don't have the expertise or the manpower or the human resources or the know-how. They need the society at large. In other words, the engagement of civil society and private sector. An example, in Milano, my hometown, it was #1 for the percentage of people with corona. They have hospitals and everything. But what happened? Private sector with civil society, they came together and they built new hospitals specifically to address the corona people infected. And they were able to defeat it and to control the situation. So this to the intervention financially and by human resources, by experts of civil society coming together and creating this alternative in response to a social crisis. Government is not able to do that. They work with protocol, with law, with political interest, leverage for the political party or ideological framework. So they create a lot of barriers. Another issue that is fundamental is the issues of corruption. Because of the corona crisis, there's been an incredible, I'm doing business on trade. There has been an astounding number of scams that came out in the world market that they are selling corona-related products. Even in Italy, one politician got arrested because he bought 10 million euro of masks that they never reached the hospital. He stole all the money by corruption. So corruption also is something that really damaged so many countries, including Brazil, in which corruption is endemic. In other words, is part of the culture. In order to defeat corruption, we need to eliminate corruption from the way of life of the common man. It has to become unacceptable. In order to do that, we need to raise the conscience of the people based upon values and sense of responsibility. There is no other solution. Only by raising the sense of public mind towards others for the benefit, if I benefit others, automatically I will benefit myself. So it's a different perspective to manage your life. I think that one point that came out interesting is that this corona has put an incredible pressure on the mind, spirit, and shoulder of everybody. Nobody can be saved from the corona. The elite always behave in the way they're like untouchables. But the corona doesn't discriminate. It can hit anybody. The rich, the super rich, the poor, anybody can be attacked by this virus. So what happened is that many people, at least people I talked to, they were forced to reevaluate their way of life, to reevaluate their priorities, to reevaluate the way we live. Many people were forced to move away from their homes and go and live in another location in order to protect their families or their way of life. They went to live with parents, with friends. They went to in the countryside. They abandoned the city. So there's so many phenomena related of how people react, how people behave in relation to the corona. But one point that is a common all over the world is the people that have been forced to think and reevaluate priorities and reevaluate the way they related to others and what is really important in life. Because death became something very close, something that really scared people. really deeply. You know, I can see people now, they go around even with a shield mask. My son traveled from Luxembourg to Brazil a month ago. The airport with like deserts, and the people, many people were moving around like there was, you know, coming from outer space, completely covered with the parameters to protect themselves from corona. So there is a lot of fear also out there. Another factor is we are facing now the second wave of the corona. Is picking up again in Europe and in many other countries. So it's like, you know, it's like a cold. You can catch cold many, many times. It's not only one time. And now we have a second wave. So honestly speaking, I think nobody knows when this, you know, crisis will be over. Nobody knows. Nobody. So how emotionally also, I'm very interested to know how emotionally mothers, you know, particularly, women particularly, are feeling and they are facing this type of challenges emotionally. How emotionally you react to this type of, you know, confrontation. You know, if your child has to go to school, how do you feel about it? You know, with this virus that go around? How do you feel? You feel, of course, concerned. What is the alternative? You know, Talita was addressing very well the issues of online education. They become more and more important. But what type of education online is very different than to have the teacher in front of you. The challenge of ask question, the dynamic is very different. Online education is very tiring for the teachers and as well for the students. It requires much more investment of energy. And also, what are going to be the parameter? You know, like Ciro was mentioning about all these contracts and financial investment and borrowing. But all this is under stress right now. Because how many businesses are going to close down by the end of this year? Worldwide. Hundreds of thousands, millions of business, small business are going to close down. This is a fact. It's unavoidable. So, you know, if you don't have business in a country, people don't pay taxes, government will not get revenue to pay doctors, to pay teachers, to pay people that provide social services. It's all related, one thing to the next. So we are facing an incredible challenge. But I don't know if anybody has some comment to make about how do you face emotionally these times? Anybody?
I'll speak, Massimo. This is Talitha.
Okay.
In reference to what you were saying, and I know I touched on this briefly about education in my opening speech, but from a parental perspective, on it, just the impact of COVID-19 when dealing with your child or children, it's very discouraging. It's very tiring. It's very stressful. I have just one child, and she's a teenager, she's 16, but I know there are many of my friends that have very small children, and they have multiple children of different ages. And so it's very difficult now that we've transitioned to online school to have a child that may be 5 years old, a child that's 9, a child that's 16, and maybe a child that's 17, that are all now at home if you have that option and you're having to homeschool them virtually. And so my daughter especially has now registered for Virtual Academy, which we had that option to do. here in the school system. And so she won't just be home during the fall season in school, but she'll be home the entire rest of the year. So we're looking at fall of 2021 before there's even an opportunity to think about going back to a traditional face-to-face classroom. And so we've had to completely change our lives. You know, we've turned our dining room into a school, a small classroom. You know, we no longer have a dining room table anymore in the dining room. So we've had to, and because all of us now, including myself, I work from home. And so we have to change the dynamics of our home and make office spaces where they can concentrate and make sure that they're not being disturbed, making sure that they're able to get online, making sure they have accessibility. A lot of people don't have the internet, or they don't have the ability to even get the internet or have accessibility to get their children online. So there are a lot of different things that come into play when it comes to just being able to have your child at home all day, every day. They're lacking in that social interaction that they're used to getting when they're going to school. And many of us are not just moms, we're sisters, we're daughters, we're wives, we're cousins. And so I'm also the daughter of elderly parents. And so you're worried now about the safety of your elderly parents and making sure that you are not a threat to them if you have to go out to the grocery store or to maintain the longevity of your children's education, go out and get books or things of that nature. So there's just a very high level of stress. A lot of things have changed. We have definitely are succumbing to what we're calling now a new normal and trying to figure out how best to go from here and move forward with whatever the situation is going to be in our lives at home, in our offices at work, and in our families and throughout our communities. So that's where I am at the moment. I'd love to hear someone else's version of what's going on in their house and whether or not they still have a dining room table.
Thank you. Yeah, also I don't have a dining table anymore for the same reason. We had to set it up, for online lecture for my grandson. So I know very well what you're talking about. But it's what you just said. I think for everybody, the emotional stress has been almost, for some people, unbearable. We work also with the elderly people through one of our music projects. And boy, they are really, really scared even to go out of the door of their homes, because they are the most vulnerable as a category of people in society to get this disease. So they are so concerned and so afraid, So I think that for everybody is really hard, worldwide. We have the same heart, we have the same, need of affection and embracing, the same need for love. So that is really something that collectively everybody can feel, I can sympathize for. And again, I see something good about it because it's really forcing people to become less superficial and to get more serious about what really counts in my relation with my family members, my friends, and people in general. So people becoming more sensitive in a way, at the same time more distant because of fear. At the same time, more close because they start to understand also other people situation. So it's quite a unique
Massimo.
moment. Go ahead, yes.
Yes, I'd like to give a slightly different perspective. And I'm an optimist by nature. I see opportunities and believe the best of people. But I think there is still a risk. And part of this conversation and the call that came out, I think, from all of the speakers was the need to come out together to speak out. Because there is still the risk that as the pandemic has manifested differently in different parts of the world. And like I said, in our context, and it's not in all African countries, like South Africa possibly had it much worse, but definitely in our part of the world, not that bad. there's still quite a lot of people who don't believe that, there's a pandemic. They've seen the figures, they'll wear masks or not. They believe it's a ploy by government to get foreign funding, a very negative narrative. And this has to do possibly with the kind of politics. Much as we, the African scholars, and much as we believe there's been a big shock to the system, there is a possibility that governments in some parts of the world will go back to business as usual. And part of what we are seeing, for instance, in our case, is that, government developed a budget, and the budget office, the oversight budget office, said, look, this looks like a regular budget, like it would look like any other year. You're continuing with the same infrastructure development projects as though we don't need to respond to the immediate crisis. So there is a possibility that unless we engage, unless we speak out, unless we are very deliberate about pushing for investments in these effective local governance structures, so there's social protection to get businesses back on their feet, especially these unseen businesses, the 80% of businesses that don't have a voice. There is a very real possibility that government will, continue with its projects. And this is because we look at the political economy around large infrastructure. And there's corruption interests, there's political interest in terms of the visibility and re-election campaigns or election campaigns, election promises, whatever. So yes, we've received a huge shock, but this does not mean we don't have to push for humane, equitable, and just socioeconomic systems. We still need to push. Otherwise, the incentives around the centralized system, centralized procurement, the corruption, those still remain, and those will undermine the sensible or logical thing, which should be to change. So just, my sense of it is that we still need to push.
No, I agree because, the situation, for example, as we were mentioning before, we have 5 million cases all in Brazil. So our pressure is very different from the pressure you may have in Kenya, because it's not at that level, actually it's very, very far, from it. But even though, like you mentioned, you don't have a large number of cases, you can see that governments in many parts of the world, they're taking advantage in order to get funding, right? But not only that, there are other governments that are taking the opportunity of this pandemic in order to get more control toward the citizen. In Italy, this is what is happening right now. So almost people don't have any liberty left of movement, for example. So I agree with you that there are different, the degree of intensity, and therefore emotionally the impact is as well different. But particularly within India, the European countries, Latin America, and the United States, and China, even though nobody's talking about China, but I have Chinese friends, the impact is really, really, really bad, emotional. It's changing the behavior of people. That is worrisome, because who knows, maybe great change will come out of a crisis. Usually that will happen, Each crisis actually creates opportunities. So we have to see 2-3 years down on the road, what are going to be the opportunity that this global crisis has created. Right now, they're not so clear. It's not self-evident. What are the positive outcomes? Also, it's much easier to find the negatives than the positives in any circumstances. But we will see down on the road. So let's move to to the participant, if any participant, or I see somebody raise his hand. Lekar Naskar, he raised his hand. Do you have a question? Well, disappear.
Massimo?
Yes.
Yes, I'd like to say some words on many important
Yes.
points were touched here.
Okay, please go ahead, Stephanie.
Yes, about the emotional aspect. Like Talita, I have been changed a lot on my agenda here at home as well, the organization. My partner also teaches at the federal institution here. So we are both online teachers, online instructors. So by the perspective of someone who teaches, I can say something and I see also the side of my students. So I have about 500 students, and what I saw and what I see actually is that the younger students, the youth, the teenagers, they have been together, connected by technology. They feel a lot the pressure of online education substantially. We have many problems also in Brazil regarding the internet connection and regarding house infrastructure. We are feeling this right now. You are paying the debt regarding infrastructure, poverty, inequality, and we see that very hard. But what I see is that technology helps, especially the teenagers, so they support each other a lot, especially that because they changed the daily habits, so they tend to study more at night instead of wake up really early in the morning. They changed their routine, so they tend to study at night. Sometimes it's really tough for us teachers and professors because they send messages to us like 2, 3 in the morning, and you see that how they changed their habits. But there is a good aspect that they are really helping and supporting each other emotionally. And here in the institution, we also provide psychological help. That's really nice. I'd like to say something about the federal institutions and the federal institutes of education, science, and technology, because I don't know if the other participants here know about them. What I say about the federal institutes is that they are really revolutionary. I've lived in the United States for a while. I've lived in Germany. So I've had the opportunity to know different kinds of and types of institutions, educational institutions. And here in Brazil, we have these very special institutions for the federal institutes. They're public. We provide a public and really qualified educational, technical education for the population. Our colleagues are doctors, masters, so kids, young teenagers, they have this opportunity to study with people who are really qualified in their areas. So the work of the federal institutions in Brazil is really revolutionary, I would say, because we can go in these communities, especially in the purest communities. Our federal institution here in my city, here in Uruguaiana, we are really in a very poor area. So our students, most of them, really need different kinds of support, like health support, psychological support. Sometimes we even provide food for their families. So here, education, you can see in Brazil that it's something really transformative. Regarding this aspect of emotional support, what I see is that as a coordinator of a course, I coordinate the marketing course here. So I work directly with adults. They're having a harder time to deal with the pandemic than the youngest teenagers, because the teenagers, they have each other like in groups, supporting each other online, on WhatsApp, on Facebook, on Instagram. And the adults, they don't have this connection. They're not so intense in social technology and in different platforms. So really depend on these face-to-face interactions. They really depend on their communities around them. They really depend on the infrastructure, and so they are having a much harder time. And I see that I attend in the daily period much more these adult students, and they really rely on me for emotional help than my youngest students. So that's really important. I think that's a point that you really need to focus on different groups as well. Youth, it's really important, and I work with them, but especially the elderly, and I have elderly parents, we need to focus on them as well, because they depend on us, because they're not good on this. So we are here, we're having this conversation, but right now my mom is trying to be connected to see me here, and she can't. She said, well, it's not working, you know, it's not on Facebook. So it's different, you know, because we need to think that we face different realities, even ourselves. We are really into the students' realities, we are into our parents' realities, we are into our neighbors' realities, and we are into the world's realities. When I see Ciro talking, it's so true. Many aspects that she brought, it's so true for Brazil as well, especially corruption. You know, Massimo know that. And I'd like to make just one more point that someone wrote here in the chat about the Ciro's point regarding the government. This person says that he does not agree with Ciro because he thinks that we shouldn't rely on governments. So I am a teacher, I'm a professor from of a federal institute. The budget of my institute, it comes from the federality, it comes from the union. So the government administrates this budget. We depend on it. So me, myself, as a professor from a federal institute, I depend on the government. So I don't think it's good for us to say that we shouldn't depend on governments. Governments are really important in a democratic world. I think it's something that's important. We should try to make them better. They should work better. So here in Brazil, we face many problems with our government, and I'm really radical on that, especially in terms of education. But I don't think we should stop to collaborate with the government, because government, they are there because we put them there. And it's really important that we have them working for us. They are our partners. They should be our partners. So I think the best strategy is to try to push the right agendas and to try to push the government by our institutions. So we have here many different institutions working together and should have a voice in governments to say, we are here, and you government, you work for us, you're there temporarily. Now our society depend on you, and I think that's really important. So that's what I would like to say.
Yes, thank you, Stephanie. When you were talking about the youth, what came to my mind, you know, I did work 2 years ago on the depression issues with the youth in Brazil. And already at that time, there was a pandemic of people, young people, on the suicide pattern. There were so many young people killing themselves. And actually, because of the pandemic, this trend has increased a lot. So the emotional impact among the youth is not just only the challenge with education to find a job, to be able to be free of movement, but there is a lot of this tendency going towards, killing themselves. It's quite common, especially, because especially teenagers, they are completely hooked by the internet, by I don't know, they spend hours and days in front of a computer with their phones. And I mean, those are many, many things that we are addressing right now, but just that came to my mind. Relating to the government issues, we need always the transversal relations between government, private sector, and civil society. All programs should involve these three fundamental elements of our society. Government institutions, the government is just there to administrate. We need a private sector to provide the sustainability of the system. And the civil society is the one who really apply hand-on on issues and touching the real life of people out of the ideological framework. So when we have this type of cooperation partnership, as you define, we need to be partner, but active, engaged, and full, with the full participations. When society is at this kind of basic infrastructure, the dynamics are very, very rich, and things are really exploding. This is my personal experience. When this is lacking, then we have problems, really serious problems. We have a lot of barriers, a lot of walls, and we don't find solutions. Only conflict and only confrontation, and the society get what? Polarized. Everything become polarized in his position, to defend his position. And that really is the beginning of the end. So we have to find different form of cooperation. Okay, thank you very much. So already we passed an hour and a half, but there are several people that would like to say something. So I would like, at least for a few minutes, to open the floor to anybody who has a question. I know that there is Father Jyoti and Father Nitya that they'd like to intervene. Father Nitya, can you go ahead?
Thank you, Massimo. First of all, I want to thank you, Massimo, for bringing only women panel. That's something new, something important, because to listen to the women's voice about society and the welfare and sufferings is always very important. Usually the male-dominated society make the deciding things, but you made it a very good initiative by bringing them. I would like to continue about this thinking process about what is to be learned in this pandemic. One thing is we need to reflect about our own fake life. We have been given so much importance for materialism, one-sided growth, and the welfare of a few individuals, corporate companies at the expense of the rest. So this is changing now. This is changing. A consumeristic mentality, unnecessary traveling, unnecessary boasting of expenses, that seems to be coming down. Less medicines are sold now, less death is taking place in the world, and less mafias, less violence. All these things create a new awareness that we can think differently, we can live differently. There's more of relationship, more of family coming together, more of living together, understanding each other. That's growing. Of course, there is some difficulty also in that. Second thing is the development. Development at the cost of whom? This is the problem. There has been death all these years, much more than what the death has brought by corona. For example, malnutrition. People die of diseases like TB, malaria, all those things. Many people are dying, but the world was not opening the mouth because the poor people die. Today, all the way, we are making big noise because the rich are also affected. So the mentality of the mind in the world is that some sectors of the people do not matter, that poor do not matter. That is a very big awareness that we bring. I'm just concluding. The last point is, in all these things, one big chunk of the people are left out even now. Example for India, even the global level, it's the same. 1/3 of the people live completely cut off from the development. In India alone, more than 300 million people living below poverty line. It's a huge number, huge amount of people living in utter poverty, one meal. It has not got the, of course, Sister Sujata touched about the forgotten people structurally, socio-economically, the Dalit, the tribal, the indigenous people. I think their voice is not coming out still. These are some of the learning points that we have to think. The periphery, people in the marginalized world, their sound is still coming dimmer and silenced. This is one thing that I want to add to this point. And pandemic, there's one type of understanding is there, good thing is there, but the cry of the poor remains the same, louder but unheard. Thank you much. Thank you, Massimo.
Yeah, Farid, I think that, from my network, because of the corona, as we were mentioning before, when we were talking about United States, that the people, they are unable to find products or goods that they're looking for. Actually, for the poor, the situation became really out of control. The situation became even more stressful than ever before in many parts of the world. So this is a fact. This is a fact. So thank you for your contribution and pointing out this deep crisis within our human family. And I think that now Father Jyoti, he has to.
Yeah.
Please go ahead.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you, Massimo, for giving the opportunity for me also. Thank you for organizing this kind of a dialogue, which is very, very important, very enlightening for us this evening. So it's a little late for us in India. I am speaking from Calcutta. Just before this, Father Nitya, who spoke, is my own elder brother. He's speaking from south of India. Right. Yeah. Thank you very much for this opportunity, because there are two things I just wanted to mention. Right now, this pandemic has affected, though it started with all the, without division and distinction, it has ended up with affecting the most disadvantaged in the society. Say, for instance, in Brazil, what I read is, in favelas, many more cases of favelas were reported, just like the colored Americans in America. And in India, basically the downtrodden, the migrants, the tribals and the Dalits, who are the downtrodden in the society. This was completely gone into. Even if this vaccination is invented and given to all the people, this lowest strata in the society, who's also socially silenced, will be the worst affected in the coming days. Those people who are civil society who are making noise on this matter are also silenced. Right now, I wanted to make up an issue in India. Just now, one of the CMO's Jesuits, 83 plus, Father Stan Swami, has been taken out, arrested for interrogation, because he was the voice of the voiceless in India. I just wanted to bring him to the international forum right now, because he's been questioned right now by the police in our country. Just his one mistake is that he stood and his values were standing for these oppressed people. And that's the way. Any dissenting voice in our country has been silenced, as well in any of the right-wing groups which is controlling the world. So this is the kind of very strange situations where we are right now. And the pandemic, I don't know what will happen in the coming days. So thanks for organizing. Continue this kind of dialogue. We can engage more of discussion and build up our own kind of support groups. Thank you very much, Mr. Matt.
Thank you, and also to participate in our dialogue. So there was another comment that came through that was interesting. Somebody contacted me privately asking if we can organize a practical training for mothers in this area of education online. So if anybody is interested to work on that, please let me know. You can contact me by my WhatsApp or email or Facebook page. Maybe we can elaborate some plan on this area. So we reached almost now 2 hours, from the beginning of our meeting. And I believe we touched a lot of very interesting issues from different angles, different viewpoints, different expertise. I really appreciate every one of you, the speakers, because you gave a very professional, in-depth and detailed contribution. I think everybody that was part of our group today really enjoy the richness of our content. The link with the Facebook streaming, for some reason today did not work. So there was a lot of people that want to connect by our page Facebook, but they were unable to do so. But we got about altogether, I believe it was about 60 participants in our discussion. That is not bad. And this conference will be posted as well on the Facebook page and on our YouTube page as well. It will be downloaded there. So you can reach it if you need it as well later on the GPF Facebook page. Thank you again. Again, it was, I hope it's just the beginning of more cooperation to come for the future. If you have any suggestions, any ideas or any proposal, please let me know, and we can work on that. I have a network in about 70 nations worldwide on different levels. I have a network with the business world quite strongly in 15 nations, and my basic network is about 20,000 people from all the way of lives. So we can cooperate and create something. The intentions of my working team through this conference is to be able to provide working tools, proposals, research to provoke things that they are constructive in any specific field. For example, with Stephanie, we have 2 projects ongoing. We are preparing a weekly, like 30 minutes, 20 minutes conference for Brazil, where we'll address youth issues, family. The title is Youth and Family at 360 Degree. The second project with the university as well is an educational training programs with our international expertise, addressing the challenge of education of our time, not only in the context of the COVID, but generally speaking, because education is being under crisis quite some time. So we need new ideas in order to upgrade the standard of educations. Anywhere in the world, we have the same problems. So for example, these are 2 projects that came out from 2 conferences in which Stephanie participated previously. And on the last conference, there was a follow-up from the social society response to COVID. A provocation came through from somebody from the audience to organize a conference on religious freedom and the persecution of faith around the world. So we will have that conference on the 20th of October, where we'll address the situation in China, the situation in the Middle East, the situation in the United States, and the situation in Ethiopia for beginning. So if you have idea or proposal, let's work together, let's make it happen. So again, thank you very much. We are closing to 2 hours. And again, I'm very grateful to your participation. And I hope we keep in touch. I hope to see you soon. Thank you very much. Ciao, ciao.
Thank you.
Ciao.
Thank you, Massimo.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. And religious freedom includes also India. India is really in big trouble.
Yeah, the sister will be there.
Yes, good.
All right, thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.